One of the big overshadowing themes, I think, of this session and going into the summer is certainly the inflationary costs on our residents in the state of Connecticut. And I think what was pointed out today is when we look to California, as many of the good representatives have mentioned, who have a head start on some of these programs, they are faced with rolling blackouts. They are faced with the highest gas prices throughout the state, throughout the country. And residents are leaving that state to go to other places. But these inflationary costs are real, and they are very impactful. But I also get concerned of the logistics of how we are going to put this whole thing together. This is a big bill. It's a big bite. I think it's too big of a bite, frankly. And I think when we talk about energy policy, so often in this chamber, we have been voting on these policies for decades. There's been some incremental change, but for me, I think the overall theme, when we look at cap and trade and the carbon emissions, the only people that have really made out on this is Wall Street. People get rich off of these type of policies, and the people that suffer are Main Street. The businesses have to absorb all of the mandates that are put down on them, and there's no real analysis of the returns. And so I think this is one of those bills that are going to go down that path. I mean, we have subsidized electric vehicles where our wealthy communities are the ones that could afford them, at the expense of everybody else that are paying these registration fees and higher electric bills to subsidize all of these programs for individuals that could afford to do it without those subsidies. I do think this bill finally, after a long time, is trying to move into the direction of making this more equitable. And those are the provisions that I do support, but it's just gone too far, in particular with school buses. I have real concern that the technology isn't there, and we shouldn't even be putting a policy in place to implement it before we know it's there. I visited the New Haven, the Connecticut Transit Station in Hamden, and I got to see the electric buses. I didn't go there for the press conference in November when they announced. I actually went there a few months later to see how they were doing, because that is the one thing that I think is important. We hold the press conferences supporting these initiatives, but we need to go back and see how they're making out. And there were some interesting observations that I made, and I hope it's successful. I think it is. But certainly figuring out the run time on these buses is still a challenge. In cold weather and warm weather, it is very different. They have a fleet of state workers that are still trying to figure out how those buses can run effectively. They've had to retrain their mechanics, and one of the areas of savings isn't just on diesel gasoline, but they're saving on labor. So we are seeing a reduction in our workforce because you don't need the mechanics to work on these vehicles. And the infrastructure of building out the charging stations, I believe, was like $110 million. And I understand we have the federal money coming in, and it makes sense to implement this policy at the state level. But when I think we're going to take all of this and impose it onto private bus companies, what is their impact going to be? And my concern is that these companies could just say, we're going to get out of the business. And then the alternative is that we are going to be stuck trying to subsidize a school bus company that we're unable to. And so I think the direction of this bill potentially would end up being that the state is going to have to run our school bus companies, because I am not convinced that the technology is there and the level of support is there for this private industry to step into this market. And so those were provisions I really wish weren't in here. I am also just very concerned that the Deep Commissioner having the authority to implement the California standards on the medium and heavyweight vehicles. We've all heard of what is happening in our trucking industry. We did run that amendment to eliminate the HUT tax. It's not a sexy political issue, but it's a significant one on our trucking industries, on our farmers. I've already received phone calls from the farmers in my community, very concerned at the impacts that this bill could have on them. People in the construction industry as well. And I frankly don't trust deep to get this right. We are constantly dealing with issues in that agency. Once they're given the power, it's very difficult for us to undo that power. I think of just what's happened in the last couple of years of what we're dealing with, the waste-to-energy industry. We put that in place, and it was a way to sort of get rid of our garbage and create clean recycling. And we've reached a point now where the system isn't working, and we needed to replace it. It's not replaced yet. And now what is happening is we are shipping our garbage out of state into landfills. And I worry this is going to be a similar situation because Connecticut doesn't have an alternative infrastructure to deliver goods throughout the state of Connecticut. We don't have the commercial train systems that could deliver our product throughout the state of Connecticut, which is probably really the viable alternative if we want to transition away from trucks. And it's just not there. And what will happen is these trucks will leave. I'm in the manufacturing business, and I continue to struggle to try to get vehicles into the state to deliver product. And if you're a small manufacturer like my family, we don't necessarily fill up a truck for delivery. The big guys could kind of make out, but those of us that might need to fill a half a truck or a quarter of a truck need to coordinate with other businesses in order to try to get that truck in and out of the state of Connecticut. It has become increasingly difficult over time to be able to do that. And policies like this is only going to make it harder for the state of Connecticut, for those small manufacturers. And those are the reasons why I say that this is a bill for Wall Street. This is a bill for publicly traded companies, you know, like a Tesla, who are in this sphere to build this industry at the expense of the Connecticut brick and mortar businesses. So with that, I unfortunately need to stand and oppose this piece of legislation. As I said, there are pieces in it that are laudable. And I guess, as I've said before, I hope it is a piece of legislation that we will come back and revisit in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr.